Is this some kind of joke? The guard's voice sliced through the crisp morning air at Arlington National Cemetery, sharp and laced with disbelief. Guard Thompson, young, rigid, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel, planted himself squarely in front of the gates, arms crossed, chest out, a human barricade in a pristine dress uniform. The old man standing before him, John Reynolds, 87, looked nothing like a threat. His frame was stooped, hands weathered by decades, face mapped with lines of a life lived fully. Simple dark suit, slightly wrinkled but clean, his shoes scuffed yet sturdy, a quiet testament to countless mornings like this one. Reynolds' eyes, pale blue and unyielding, scanned the rolling hills beyond the gate, ignoring the officer's glare, calm as the flags fluttered half-mast in the early sunlight. "Sir, this is a private funeral for General Harrison. Invitation only. I need to see your credentials, or you need to leave," Thompson barked, voice tight with authority and condescension. The second guard, a corporal named Davis, leaned casually against the post, smirking, observing the interaction as if it were an amusing performance. Reynolds' silence was absolute, the kind of silence that demanded notice, the sort that held centuries of discipline and a lifetime of unseen battles. Thompson stepped forward, the gravel crunching under his polished shoes, gesturing vaguely toward the perimeter. "Move along, Grandpa, or I'll make you," he said, a threat dressed in casual derision. Reynolds lifted a single hand, slow, deliberate, a calm like still water in the eye of a storm. "I'm here for General Harrison. He requested me," he said, voice low, even, carrying a weight that felt heavier than the morning sun. Davis let out a short, humorless laugh, eyebrows rising. "Oh, right. Sure. The old man and the general are best friends, huh?" he sneered. Thompson's expression hardened, leaning closer. "Without proper credentials, you are trespassing. No medals, no proof of service, just an old man in a suit. Step aside now." Reynolds' gaze did not waver. His proof was etched not in ribbon or brass, but in memory carved into his bones, in the quiet dignity of decades of service. A small, tarnished lapel pin caught Thompson's eye, dull and misshapen, a relic overlooked by most, yet brimming with history. With a flick of his finger, Thompson tapped it, smirk widening. In that instant, the morning air dissolved, replaced by the torrential rain and sucking mud of a distant battlefield. The smell of cordite and wet earth filled Reynolds' senses. A young lieutenant, David Harrison, pinned beneath a fallen banyan tree, hands slick with blood, thrust a jagged piece of metal into the hands of a teenage John Reynolds. "Keep this," he rasped, pain sharpening his voice. "It's not official, but it means you were there. It means you saved us." The vision snapped back, Arlington's quiet hills restored, the sun glinting harshly in Thompson's eyes. Reynolds' lips tightened, the ember of long-banked fire now visible, steady in his pale blue gaze. He reached out, gently pushing Thompson's hand away from the pin. "Don't touch that," he said, voice low, dangerous, controlled. Murmurs ran through the sparse crowd forming near the entrance, their attention drawn to the growing tension. Captain Hayes, observing from the back, recognized the aura of unyielding resolve, the stillness of a man whose worth was invisible to the untrained eye but palpable to anyone who had seen history unfold. Without a word, Hayes pulled a phone from his pocket, fingers flying across the screen, reaching a direct line to Colonel Markinson, a man who had known Harrison personally for decades. The subtle call set in motion a chain of reactions that would soon change the balance of authority at the gates, a silent summons that promised recognition long overdue. Meanwhile, Reynolds stood motionless, the wind tugging at the flags, sunlight glinting off his pin, the silence around him thick with anticipation and unspoken reverence. Every second a heartbeat leading to the moment when the past and present would converge, when the humility of one man would finally command the respect of all who had doubted him. Reynolds shifted his weight slightly, adjusting the stance of his hands on the cane he carried for stability, though his balance remained firm, a testament to decades of training and endurance. The wind stirred the crisp edges of the flags above, their red and white stripes snapping sharply, carrying a faint metallic scent from the nearby ceremonial vehicles. The junior officers exchanged nervous glances, their faces betraying a subtle awareness that something in the air had shifted, though they could not yet identify what. Reynolds' gaze remained fixed forward, pale blue eyes calm, unwavering, taking in the gathered mourners with quiet assessment. A pinched line of sunlight reflected off his metal, catching the corner of Captain Hayes' eye. Hayes had been trained to recognize patterns, to read a room, and he knew that the man standing before him was no ordinary guest. He could feel the discipline etched into Reynolds' posture, the unspoken history folded neatly into the stoic calm of a man who had been tested beyond what any of these young officers could comprehend. Thompson and Davis shifted impatiently, the polished shoes tapping against the gravel, the sound sharp, trying to assert dominance, trying to maintain the illusion of control. Reynolds did not flinch. The air seemed heavier around him, a subtle gravitation of authority that pulled the attention of the onlookers, the faint rustle of coats and whispers of curious spectators falling into the background. A young lieutenant, unaware of the full significance of the moment, leaned forward, voice rising with an attempt at assertive command. "Sir, you must leave immediately. You are creating a security concern." Reynolds' response was measured, the words simple, calm, each syllable carrying the weight of certainty. "I am here because General Harrison requested me. I will not leave until I am acknowledged." The officers froze, a microsecond of disbelief flaring in their eyes. Hayes quietly retrieved his phone again, thumbs moving rapidly over the screen, sending discreet messages to the higher chain of command. The quiet urgency was almost imperceptible to the crowd, but it carried the gravity of an incoming storm. The old man's eyes scanned the perimeter, noting the subtle shifts in stance, the minor tremors of confidence in the young guards, and he adjusted slightly, allowing his presence to fill the space without a word. The rustling of uniforms and the faint clatter of ceremonial equipment faded into near silence as all attention subtly gravitated toward Reynolds. His mind wandered briefly, remembering the rainy hills of Korea, the mud under his boots, the weight of responsibility pressing him to act swiftly to save those under his command. The memory was vivid, triggered by the touch of Thompson's hand on his metal earlier, a reminder of courage under pressure and the importance of measured action. Reynolds' hand tightened slightly on the cane, the muscles of his forearm coiling with barely perceptible tension, signaling readiness without aggression. Hayes could see it, could feel it, the anticipation, the contained energy that hinted at revelation. The junior officers glanced around, noticing the subtle shift, but unsure how to respond, the sense of authority in the room growing heavier with each passing second. Reynolds did not speak further, allowing the silence to stretch, allowing the weight of his presence to speak louder than any shouted command. The breeze picked up slightly, carrying the distant murmur of ceremonial horns, the soft metallic gleam of the gates catching the sunlight, framing Reynolds in a tableau that seemed larger than life, almost cinematic in its stillness. Every observer felt the moment, the unspoken acknowledgement that the ordinary perception of this elderly man was wrong, that a lifetime of experience had imbued him with a command beyond rank, beyond ceremony. A faint exhale from Hayes, barely noticeable, carried the recognition of the situation, the understanding that the chain of command would soon be challenged, not in confrontation but in acknowledgement, as authority prepared to step in. Reynolds adjusted his coat, the fabric soft with age, a quiet reflection of years lived fully, and shifted his weight, preparing for the moment when acknowledgement would arrive. The tension coiled like a spring ready to release. All attention centered on the quiet, resolute figure whose calm composure had already begun to command respect, even from those who would not have expected it. Every heartbeat seemed magnified in the still air, the distance between him and the guards a space charged with anticipation, as if the very atmosphere waited for the unseen chain of command to act, for the recognition that had been delayed but was inevitable. The light shifted subtly across the gravestones behind the gate, casting long shadows that stretched toward Reynolds, framing him against the backdrop of solemnity and history, an almost tangible halo of authority settling around his shoulders. He remained poised, serene, ready, allowing the quiet gravity of his presence to unfold naturally, as all eyes unconsciously tracked his measured movements. And as the officers prepared for the inevitable appearance of the authority who would finally bring the moment to resolution. A subtle shift in the air drew the attention of the crowd without a single word being spoken. Reynolds' eyes narrowed slightly, catching the glint of sunlight on a small pin he had worn for decades, a token of service that had survived countless ceremonies and battles. The metal, though tarnished, reflected the weight of a lifetime, and it seemed to pulse with the memory of every mission, every responsibility, every decision that had defined him. Thompson and Davis exchanged uneasy glances, a slight hesitation creeping into their stance, the polished gravel under their shoes now sounding unusually loud against the hushed murmurs of onlookers. Captain Hayes, observing from the rear, sensed the shift, the subtle acknowledgment of history and experience that hung around Reynolds like an invisible aura. He could see the young guard's confidence waver, their certainty confronted by the unspoken authority of a man who had spent decades in service, unseen yet profoundly influential. Reynolds adjusted his coat, the fabric worn and soft, but with an air of precision and care, moving as though every gesture had been rehearsed over a lifetime. The crowd leaned slightly forward, unconsciously drawn into the gravity of the moment, the quiet hum of the morning blending with the faint rustle of the flags above. A faint breeze carried the metallic tang of the pin, mingling with the crisp scent of the morning air, a sensory reminder of the ceremonial weight of the day. Reynolds' gaze swept across the young officers, steady and unwavering, a calm that contrasted sharply with the tightening tension in their shoulders and the slight quiver in the jawlines that once seemed so unyielding. Every movement was deliberate, measured, a silent message that no command from these young men could override the respect earned through decades of service and sacrifice. Hayes' fingers drummed lightly against the phone in his pocket, ready to relay the acknowledgment up the chain of command, a conduit between the unseen authority of Reynolds' past and the imminent intervention of those who held the power to recognize it formally. The pin on Reynolds' chest seemed to draw the eyes of those nearby, its dull surface reflecting not light alone but the weight of memory, a silent trigger that recalled the jungles of Korea, the relentless discipline, and the unwavering loyalty that had defined his life. In the distance, the hum of the ceremonial motorcade approached, a rhythm that grew with every second, juxtaposing the slow, deliberate stillness of Reynolds with the hurried movements of those who sought to control the present without understanding the past. Thompson shifted uneasily, glancing at Davis, both men now acutely aware of the latent authority before them, yet unsure how to navigate the invisible hierarchy that had suddenly become tangible. Reynolds' hand rested lightly on his cane, the posture upright and commanding, a quiet declaration that he belonged, that his presence was not incidental, and that the recognition long overdue was about to manifest. Hayes exhaled softly, a near imperceptible release that mirrored the collective anticipation, sensing that the next few moments would crystallize into a tableau of respect and revelation, a moment when decades of service, silence, and steadfast integrity would finally be acknowledged. The shadows of the gravestones stretched long across the ground, the sunlight shifting as if to spotlight Reynolds, accentuating the lines of his face, the steady set of his shoulders, and the calm certainty in his pale blue eyes. Every person present felt it, the weight of history, the stillness of authority, the unspoken command that demanded attention and respect, a crescendo building in silence before the intervention that would honor the legacy carried in that quiet, resolute figure. The distant rumble of approaching vehicles became audible, a subtle percussion underscoring the quiet intensity of the scene. Reynolds' posture remained unbroken, shoulders square, cane steady beneath his hands, every inch of him radiating the calm assurance of decades spent navigating situations far more perilous than this. The guards shifted slightly, unease creeping into their rigid stance as the realization dawned that the authority they relied upon might be superseded by a force far beyond their immediate comprehension. Captain Hayes, eyes scanning for subtle cues, noticed the slight tightening of the air, the way the sunlight glinted off the pin on Reynolds' lapel, catching it at just the right angle to draw attention without a word being spoken. The sound of gravel crunching under distant footsteps amplified, each step deliberate, a measured cadence that cut through the murmurs of the small crowd now gathering near the entrance. Reynolds' gaze followed the subtle movement of shadows cast by the rising sun, noting the approach of a black sedan, the emblem on its side signaling the presence of the colonel called in by Hayes. The old man did not move to greet, did not speak, his presence alone commanding a respectful pause from those near him. The guard's youthful bravado faltered, each glance exchanged carrying an unspoken acknowledgment of the latent authority that now encircled Reynolds. Hayes felt the tension coil, the anticipation of recognition tightening the air until it seemed almost tangible. Every observer was drawn to the silent figure, the understated dominance of experience that did not shout but filled the space entirely. The motorcade slowed, the vehicles forming a deliberate procession that approached the gate with precision, a visual punctuation to the atmosphere of restrained expectation. Reynolds shifted slightly, the movement minimal but deliberate, signaling readiness without urgency, a poised acknowledgment of the change in circumstance. The pin caught another glint of sunlight, and for a fleeting moment, the world seemed to contract around him, highlighting the contrast between the temporary authority of the young guards and the enduring weight of service and history carried by Reynolds. Hayes' hand hovered near his phone, yet he did not speak, allowing the unfolding moment to maintain its natural rhythm, the silence charged with the promise of resolution. Thompson and Davis, finally sensing the imminent arrival of formal recognition, adjusted their stance, feet slightly apart, hands lowering, the first subtle cracks in their composure evident as they measured Reynolds not as an old man, but as a figure of undeniable significance. The ambient noise of the cemetery, the rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of voices, the faint metallic echoes from ceremonial instruments, faded into a backdrop, the focus narrowing to the figure standing firm and the approaching symbols of institutional authority. Reynolds exhaled softly, almost imperceptibly, a breath that seemed to carry the weight of years of patience, service, and unwavering dedication. The colonel emerged from the nearest vehicle, impeccably uniformed, moving with the authority that only rank and experience could confer, yet pausing just long enough to acknowledge Reynolds without a word, the gesture amplifying the silent dialogue between presence and recognition. The guards stiffened further, the young lieutenant shifting uneasily, realizing that every step taken by the approaching officer was a visual confirmation of the truth Reynolds embodied. The sun climbed slightly higher, casting long, precise shadows that highlighted the contours of Reynolds' face, the determined set of his jaw, and the steady clarity in his pale blue eyes. Each subtle movement of the colonel, each measured step toward the gate, reverberated through the assembled observers, drawing a collective inhalation, a moment suspended in anticipation. Hayes noted the fine details, the glint of buttons on the colonel's uniform, the deliberate rhythm of his boots against the gravel, the understated confidence that spoke of years spent commanding respect without resorting to force. Reynolds shifted his gaze briefly to the crowd, acknowledging the subtle recognition of those who had begun to sense the history before them, the narrative of decades woven into the stillness of one resolute figure. The atmosphere thickened, charged with expectation, every footfall from the approaching vehicles a reminder that the chain of command was about to converge with experience, that the unseen legacy of courage, service, and integrity would soon be honored in full. As the first sedan reached the gate, the assembled observers leaned slightly forward, the collective breath of anticipation suspended, and Reynolds remained poised, a quiet sentinel of history, embodying the intersection of past valor and present acknowledgment, ready for the moment when silence would finally give way to recognition. The sound of the motorcade slowed to a measured crawl, tires crunching against the gravel as the colonel stepped forward, the weight of his steps echoing faintly through the morning air. Reynolds did not flinch, his stance firm, one hand lightly resting on his cane, the other brushing the edge of his lapel as if affirming the significance of the small, tarnished pin that had become the silent herald of his presence. Captain Hayes observed from a discreet distance, sensing the subtle shift in the demeanor of those around him. The guards, Thompson and Davis, adjusted their posture repeatedly, each movement betraying their growing awareness that the ordinary rules they had relied upon no longer applied. Reynolds' pale blue eyes scanned the assembly of mourners, taking in the subtle expressions of curiosity, surprise, and tentative respect that rippled through the crowd. The faint clatter of ceremonial instruments in the distance created a rhythm, a quiet percussion against the hushed murmurs and the whispering of flags above, a soundtrack to the unfolding tension. The colonel reached the gate, his presence commanding without a word, uniform impeccable, polished boots catching the sunlight, a visual assertion of authority. Reynolds inclined his head slightly in acknowledgment, a gesture measured, precise, and full of the calm dignity that had long defined him. Hayes could see the effect ripple outward, the gathered onlookers straightening slightly, their attention drawn completely to the interplay of experience and rank that now occupied the space before them. Thompson's voice, once sharp and derisive, faltered as he attempted to issue instructions that seemed suddenly inconsequential against the combined weight of Reynolds' presence and the colonel's unspoken approval. The light glinted across the metal, casting a small reflection onto the gravel below, a visual signal as potent as any spoken command. The crowd leaned subtly forward, drawn into the narrative unfolding silently, each observer sensing that a historical acknowledgment, long deferred, was about to occur. Reynolds' movements remained minimal, each gesture purposeful, the slightest shift of weight, the precise adjustment of his coat, and the slow, deliberate movement of his hand over the cane speaking volumes about his readiness and poise. The air seemed to thicken, a tangible anticipation pressing gently against those present, as though the environment itself had adjusted to accommodate the authority embodied in the older man. Hayes noted the minute changes in posture of the junior officers, subtle cues of respect forming involuntarily, a recognition of the deeper command that Reynolds carried without need for speech. The colonel moved closer to the gate, pausing momentarily to glance at Reynolds, a subtle nod affirming the acknowledgment that had been long overdue. The rustle of the flags, the faint shimmer of sunlight across polished brass, and the soft exhalations of onlookers created a harmonic stillness, a pause in time where attention was focused entirely on the quiet assertion of presence in history. Reynolds exhaled gently, the breath carrying the weight of a lifetime of service, observation, and unwavering composure. The subtle sounds of movement in the motorcade, the shuffle of feet, the distant hum of ceremonial activity all receded into a supporting background, allowing the gravity of the central figures to dominate the auditory landscape. Each observer felt the convergence of patience, experience, and authority, the synthesis of quiet vigilance and formal recognition, creating a moment suspended in the collective awareness of all present. The sun climbed steadily, the shadows lengthening, framing Reynolds and the colonel in a tableau that seemed composed by the natural cadence of light, air, and presence. Every glance, every subtle movement contributed to the tension and the anticipation of acknowledgment, a careful orchestration of silence and observation that built toward the inevitable moment of recognition. Reynolds remained poised, unflinching, every element of his being a testament to decades of discipline, integrity, and calm authority, ready to transform the silent anticipation into the resolution that history had quietly demanded. Reynolds stepped forward, the gravel crunching softly beneath his shoes, each sound amplified in the stillness that had settled over the cemetery. His cane remained steady, the simple motion of adjusting, its position conveying both grace and authority, an understated command of presence that drew the eyes of all nearby. Captain Hayes observed closely, noting the subtle way Reynolds carried himself, the way every movement seemed deliberate, measured, as though each step had been practiced in countless scenarios over decades. The crowd, previously murmuring with curiosity and uncertainty, now leaned subtly forward, collectively sensing the gravitas that Reynolds exuded without uttering a single word. Thompson and Davis exchanged tense glances, their earlier confidence replaced by the realization that the moment they had attempted to control was now slipping beyond their reach. The colonel moved alongside Reynolds, steps slow and precise, maintaining a respectful distance, his gaze acknowledging the decades of service and sacrifice represented in the quiet figure before him. Sunlight glinted off Reynolds' medal and pin, catching the attention of onlookers, a visual signal that carried significance far beyond its modest appearance. Hayes could see the subtle ripples in the crowd's demeanor, The way attention had sharpened, the way bodies straightened, postures shifting instinctively toward respect. Reynolds' hand brushed lightly over the pin again, a barely perceptible gesture, yet it seemed to convey the depth of history, the chain of loyalty and duty that spanned years of service. The air itself seemed to respond, a quiet tension vibrating among the gathered observers, their breaths collectively slowed as if in recognition of the gravity of the unfolding moment. Thompson attempted to speak again, voice uncertain, words catching on the edge of hesitation, as if aware that any command could no longer override the unspoken authority now filling the space. Davis's hands twitched at his sides, the polished shoes scraping faintly against the gravel, betraying the anxiety creeping into the once assured stance of the young guards. Hayes noted the smallest details, the subtle shift in Reynolds' shoulders, the measured tilt of his head, the calm precision of his movements, all communicating confidence rooted in a lifetime of experience, training, and resilience. The wind rustled through the flags above, carrying the faint metallic scent of the pins and metals scattered among the gathered veterans and mourners, the sensory cues reinforcing the importance of the moment. The colonel paused briefly at the gate, eyes meeting Reynolds in silent acknowledgment, a nod passing between them that carried a weight greater than any spoken introduction. Every observer, from the youngest officer to the assembled family members and dignitaries, felt the magnetic pull of the moment, the quiet authority of Reynolds juxtaposed with the ceremonial precision of the colonel. The distant motorcade drew nearer, engines humming in a measured cadence, adding a subtle rhythm to the stillness. Reynolds adjusted his coat slightly, a movement that seemed ordinary yet imbued with the poised confidence of a man fully aware of his own significance. Hayes exhaled softly, sensing the anticipation building to its peak, the collective attention of all present fixed on the convergence of history, authority, and personal legacy embodied in the quiet figure who now commanded the scene without a single raised voice. Thompson and Davis, still standing at the gate, appeared smaller in the presence of Reynolds' calm certainty, their posture betraying the dawning comprehension that they were witnesses to something far larger than themselves. The sunlight shifted across the rolling hills, highlighting the subtle contours of Reynolds' face, the steady set of his jaw, and the unwavering clarity in his pale blue eyes. Every element, the breeze, the rustling flags, the polished gravel, the hushed murmurs, coalesced into a tableau that communicated the weight of respect, service, and recognition, a silent orchestration of atmosphere that prepared the assembled witnesses for the moment when authority and history would finally meet in acknowledgment. Reynolds remained poised, serene, every gesture deliberate, embodying decades of dedication, patience, and quiet power, a living testament to the enduring impact of service and the inevitable recognition of legacy. The soft hum of the motorcade slowed to a gentle pause, and Reynolds' gaze swept over the assembled crowd, each face reflecting a spectrum of curiosity, apprehension, and dawning recognition. Captain Hayes shifted slightly, the subtle click of his shoes against the gravel marking the measured passage of time, as if he were counting the seconds until the inevitable acknowledgment would unfold. The guards, Thompson and Davis, remained stiff, the polished surfaces of their boots catching the sunlight, their earlier confidence dissipating under the weight of history now pressing silently around them. Reynolds adjusted his coat with a deliberate motion, the worn fabric whispering softly against itself, a tactile echo of the discipline and care with which he had lived his life. His pale blue eyes, steady and unflinching, scanned the perimeter, noting the positions of the mourners, the subtle movements of the junior officers, the way the flags fluttered in the crisp morning air, every detail, committing itself to memory with the precision of long practice. The colonel stepped forward, maintaining a distance that was respectful yet commanding, a silent partner in the choreography of recognition that was about to take place. The gravel beneath Reynolds' shoes shifted slightly as he adjusted his stance, a minor movement that nevertheless carried the confidence of a man entirely comfortable in his presence and in the awareness of the legacy he carried. Hayes felt the tension rise, the anticipation coiling through the air like an invisible spring, every breath in the assembly collectively held as if waiting for the next heartbeat to release the moment. A faint rustle from the flags overhead added rhythm to the stillness, a soft percussion against the silent cadence of authority and observation. The sunlight reflected off the metal and pin, casting brief glimmers across the gravel, visual punctuation that underscored the significance of the scene. Reynolds' hand brushed lightly over the pin again, each motion precise, deliberate, conveying both readiness and quiet command, a subtle reminder of the decades of service and unwavering integrity that had brought him to this moment. The guards shifted slightly, a synchronous acknowledgment of the latent authority surrounding them, the first hints of respect beginning to ripple through their posture. Hayes, still observing, noted the precise coordination of presence and anticipation, the way Reynolds occupied the space without raising a voice, how each observer unconsciously oriented toward him, drawn by a force that transcended simple physicality. The distant murmur of the ceremonial motorcade, the faint metallic glint of badges and medals among the mourners, and the subtle exhalations of those gathered combined to create an atmosphere thick with anticipation and recognition. Reynolds exhaled softly, his breath carrying the weight of a lifetime, a quiet affirmation of the poised patience and readiness that defined him. The colonel's measured approach continued, boots clicking against the gravel, each step synchronized with the silent rhythm of the gathering, a visual reinforcement of the authority about to be exercised. Every detail, the shifting sunlight, the rustle of coats, the faint creak of polished shoes, the quiet alignment of attention, converged around Reynolds, reinforcing the gravity and inevitability of the moment. Observers felt the culmination of years of service, history, and unspoken respect coalescing in the space between the quiet veteran and the formal presence of authority now arriving. Reynolds remained poised, every gesture intentional, embodying the intersection of personal legacy, institutional recognition, and the enduring command that comes from a lifetime of discipline, patience, and unwavering dedication. The shadows stretched long across the cemetery, framing the figure of Reynolds and the approaching colonel in a tableau of anticipation, attention, and the quiet power of a presence that demanded acknowledgment. The gentle breeze stirred the flags once more, carrying a faint metallic tang from the pins and medals, a sensory reinforcement of the weight of history, while Reynolds maintained his calm, deliberate stance, ready to transform the collective anticipation into the long-awaited moment of recognition that history had prepared. The moment stretched, a profound silence settling over the cemetery as Reynolds remained poised, every inch of him radiating the calm authority earned over decades of service. The colonel, now standing directly at the gate beside him, acknowledged Reynolds with a subtle nod, a silent affirmation that carried the weight of institutional recognition. The guards, Thompson and Davis, stood frozen, their youthful bravado dissipated entirely, replaced by a quiet respect that was instinctive rather than commanded. The sunlight shifted, catching the metal and lapel pin, reflecting a faint brilliance across the gravel that drew the eyes of all observers, amplifying the importance of the figure before them. The assembled mourners, previously murmuring softly, straightened, their collective attention drawn to the convergence of experience, authority, and the quiet dignity embodied in Reynolds. Hayes, still slightly behind the main scene, felt the tension release incrementally as the recognition manifested, a subtle exhale escaping him, the culmination of anticipation now visible in the posture of every person present. Reynolds adjusted the position of his cane, a minimal movement, yet one imbued with the steady confidence of a man who had navigated far more complex scenarios than a ceremonial blockade, his eyes scanning the crowd, catching glimpses of realization on faces that had doubted him moments before. The distant hum of the motorcade faded further, replaced by the soft rustle of flags and the faint shuffle of feet, creating a rhythm that harmonized with the silent acknowledgment that had settled over the space. The colonel's presence, measured and deliberate, reinforced the authority that had arrived not with force but with recognition, a visual and emotional confirmation that the legacy of service and the weight of history carried by Reynolds were indisputable. The guards' shoulders eased, the rigid tension in their arms and stance softening as they processed the visible and silent command inherent in Reynolds' demeanor. The morning light cast long shadows across the rolling hills, framing the central figures in a tableau of respect and acknowledgment. Every detail, the glint of the pin, the shine of polished boots, the faint sway of flagpoles, contributing to the cinematic quality of the moment. Reynolds' gaze remained steady, unwavering, a calm center amidst the subtle ripple of realization passing through the observers. Hayes noticed the faint expressions of awe, of understanding dawning on the gathered officers, the young lieutenant among them, now standing a little straighter, a subtle humility reflecting in his posture. The air carried the faint scent of polished gravel and sun-warmed metal, sensory cues that grounded the scene in its physical reality, while the emotional weight of acknowledgment spread through the assembly. Reynolds shifted slightly, tilting his head in a gesture that was almost imperceptible, yet it carried the quiet power of one who knew the value of patience, experience, and measured presence. Every eye present was drawn to him, the silent gravity of decades of dedication radiating outward, filling the space more effectively than any verbal assertion could. The colonel's gaze met Reynolds, a mutual understanding passing between them, a quiet acknowledgement that history and service were finally recognized in the proper moment. The flags above caught another glint of light, shimmering subtly, reflecting off medals and pins among the mourners, accentuating the gravity of the ceremonial recognition unfolding without a single spoken word. The crowd exhaled collectively, subtly, as if sensing the release of tension and the confirmation of justice in the form of acknowledgement. Reynolds' posture remained impeccable, every movement deliberate, every detail communicating the command of presence, the authority earned through decades of steadfast dedication and unwavering integrity. The gravel, the sunlight, the soft rustle of coats, the gentle sway of the flags, all coalesced to highlight the tableau of respect, the culmination of anticipation, and the formal arrival of recognition that had been long deferred. Reynolds remained a calm sentinel, embodying the intersection of personal legacy and institutional authority, a living testament to the quiet power of service and the enduring impact of a life dedicated to duty, patience, and unwavering composure. The final moments unfolded with a solemn clarity, Reynolds standing tall despite the years, his cane planted firmly, the weight of his presence commanding attention without a word. The colonel, positioned slightly behind yet in quiet solidarity, gestured subtly toward the gates, a formal acknowledgement that the barriers of youth, assumption, and procedure had been superseded by earned respect. Thompson and Davis, the once confident young guards, remained frozen, their eyes wide, shoulders taut, recognizing the depth of service and legacy embodied in the older man before them. Captain Hayes exhaled slowly, observing the subtle adjustments in posture across the crowd, the gradual realization dawning that they were witnesses to the intersection of history and honor, a moment that had been years in the making yet executed in perfect stillness. The morning light intensified, casting long, precise shadows across the cemetery grounds, glinting off the medals and pins scattered among the assembly, emphasizing the silent ceremony of acknowledgement that had taken form. Reynolds' gaze swept over the audience, noting the mixture of admiration, awe, and newfound respect etched into each face, the subtle shifts in the young officers' stances, the slight nods of understanding from those who had previously doubted. The breeze carried a gentle rustle of flags, a soft auditory accompaniment to the visual tableau, and the faint metallic scent from the ceremonial emblems mingled with the crisp air, creating a sensory landscape that reinforced the gravity of the occasion. Reynolds' hand brushed lightly across his lapel, the motion deliberate, drawing attention to the symbol of service that had long been overlooked, now a focal point of recognition for all present. Every subtle movement, from the tilt of his head to the measured step forward, radiated authority derived not from position, but from a lifetime of steadfast dedication and unwavering integrity. Hayes noted the subtle coordination in the gestures, the quiet interplay between Reynolds and the colonel, the unspoken conversation between decades of experience and institutional authority. The onlookers, now fully absorbed, shifted their focus completely to the veteran, absorbing the quiet lesson in patience, perseverance, and the enduring impact of personal legacy. The soft crunch of gravel beneath the colonel's boots marked the rhythm of resolution, each step a punctuation in the unfolding acknowledgment of history embodied in Reynolds. Shadows from the gravestones stretched across the ground, intersecting with the beams of sunlight to create a visual frame around the veteran, emphasizing the composure and dignity he maintained amidst the silent congregation. The breeze lifted subtly, teasing the edges of coats and uniforms, carrying the weight of anticipation and the collective exhalation of the audience now reconciled with the truth of the man before them. Reynolds exhaled, a calm, controlled release, the gesture symbolic, measured, resonating across the gathered crowd, conveying both relief and the quiet satisfaction of recognition long overdue. The soft hum of distant vehicles, the subtle rustling of leaves, the faint metallic reflection of pins and metals, all coalesced into a tapestry of solemn acknowledgment, each element reinforcing the silent, yet potent, ceremony of respect. Reynolds' posture remained impeccable, each gesture deliberate, embodying decades of service, restraint, and disciplined presence, a living testament to the enduring value of integrity and quiet power. As the sun rose higher, the shadows shortened, but the gravity of the moment remained, an unspoken agreement settling across the cemetery that the veteran's service, patience, and unwavering composure had finally commanded the recognition he had long earned. The crowd remained hushed, the air charged with reverence, as Reynolds, calm and unyielding, allowed the quiet authority of his life's work to resonate fully, leaving a lasting impression of dignity, respect, and the timeless power of steadfast commitment to duty and honor.